Welcome to the overview webinar for the Education Research and Development Centers competition, which is CFDA number 84.305C. This is Christina Chin from the National Center for Education Research. This year, the National Center for Education Research is competing 3 Research and Development Centers, or R&D Centers. In this webinar, I will go over the general requirements of your application to the R&D Center topic focused on improving opportunities and achievement for English learners in secondary school settings. In this webinar, I will provide an overview of IES in the R&D Centers, followed by information on the secondary school R&D Center topic. I will then wrap up by providing information on the next steps for applying. Before launching into the FY2020 R&D Center competition, I will briefly describe the core purpose of IES. As you probably know, the U.S. Department of Education, or ED, aims to promote student achievement and preparation. The Institute of Education Sciences is the independent research arm of ED, as authorized by the Education Sciences Reform Act in 2002. We are nonpartisan, and we are charged with providing rigorous evidence to inform education practice and policy and sharing this information with educators, parents, policymakers, researchers, and the public. The overall mission of IES is to describe the condition and progress of education in the United States, identify education practices that improve academic achievement and access to education opportunities, and to evaluate the effectiveness of federal and other education programs. This graphic represents the organizational structure of IES. We are led by a director who receives advice and consultation from the National Board for Education Sciences. The board consists of 15 voting members who are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Our Science Office oversees the scientific peer review process for IES grant applications and IES reports. We also have 4 centers within IES. The National Center for Education Statistics is the primary federal entity for collecting and analyzing data related to education. Within NCES, you may be familiar with the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. Within NCES, you may also find many large national longitudinal data sets, including, for example, the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study. The National Center for Education Evaluation and Regional Assistance conducts unbiased, large-scale evaluations of education programs supported by federal funds, provides technical assistance, and supports the development and use of research and evaluation throughout the United States. In NCEE, you will also find the What Works Clearinghouse and the Regional Educational Labs. The 2 centers that award grants are highlighted here in blue. The National Center for Education Research, referred to as NCER, and the National Center for Special Education Research, or NCSER. The grant opportunities that we will be talking about today are managed through NCER. You will also notice here that the research centers are separate from the Science Office and the Standards and Review staff, meaning that we, program officers, are not involved in the peer review process. This allows us to work closely with you, providing technical assistance to you on your applications. We will discuss more about that later in this webinar. NCER supports field-initiated, innovative solutions to improve education research. The end goal of such research is to support policymakers, practitioners, researchers, learners, and the public in their work. Thus, IES strives to support rigorous and relevant research, disseminate the findings from education research, and train researchers to conduct high-quality research and disseminate it appropriately. We have separate requests for applications, or RFAs, for the research and training activities. Our largest competition, CFDA 84.305A, called 305A for short, covers the education research activities, whereas the competition we are discussing today, CFDA 84.305C, covers the Education Research and Development Centers. The National Research and Development Center, supported by IES, are responsible for contributing to the solution of a specific education problem and generating new knowledge and theories relevant to the focus of the center. The centers are also responsible for providing national leadership within the center's topic by disseminating research and engaging in dialogue with researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And finally, the centers are also responsible for conducting relatively rapid research and scholarship on supplemental questions that emerge within the center's topic area. This supplemental work will vary depending on the needs of the field and IES input. IES R&D Centers are cooperative agreements in which the institution that holds the grant and IES work together to ensure a successful project. This means that during the life of a center, IES will provide input and guidance on the center's activities. For FY2020, IES has identified a need for a large-scale coordinated research effort to explore and advance the available knowledge and tools related to English learners' learning opportunities in secondary school settings and how these learning opportunities affect outcomes. So under the Improving Opportunities and Achievement for English Learners in Secondary School Settings R&D Center, researchers will conduct studies to identify systemic and instructional influences, including policies, rules, and processes that affect EL's access to the general curriculum and its relation to education outcomes. The Secondary School EL Center will engage in a focused program of research to examine the instruction that secondary school English learners receive. Specifically, the center will carry out 2 lines of research. First, the center will identify and describe the policies and system-level practices that are associated with secondary EL's access to the general curriculum and their relation to education outcomes. If possible, the center will test the link between these policies and practices and EL's access to the general curriculum. Second, the center will identify, with some development if necessary, at least one approach to improving secondary school EL's access to and ability to learn from instruction in general education courses where English is the language of instruction. Observe and test where possible the links between these practices, EL's access to the general curriculum, and EL's education outcomes. Since the 2 components of the focused program of research require different types of expertise, applicants should consider collaborative partnerships to ensure that the center's key personnel reflect the diverse knowledge and skills necessary to carry out this work. Applicants may propose to carry out these 2 major activities either sequentially or simultaneously. When preparing your application, you must attend to both the requirements and recommendations listed in the RFA. For your application to go forward to peer review, you must meet the general requirements for an application along with the specific requirements for the R&D Center topic. These requirements will be the primary focus of today's webinar, but you should also read the details about all of the requirements in the RFA. In addition to the requirements, there are additional recommendations in each center topic area to help you write the project narrative. We strongly encourage you to incorporate the recommendations into your project narrative and relevant appendices. IES reviewers will use the recommendations to help guide them as they score applications, and applications that attend to all of the recommendations are more likely to be funded. Where appropriate, the recommendations are aligned with the new IES Standards for Excellence in Education Research, or NCER, principles, to ensure that research is transparent, actionable, and focused on meaningful outcomes that have the potential to improve education. The general requirements specific to the secondary school EL Center include: 1. The sample must focus on students in grades 6 to 12 who are currently identified as English learners by their education agency's definitions. 2. The research must include measures of academic outcomes. IES supports research on a diverse set of academic outcomes across development that fall under 2 categories. The first category includes academic outcomes that reflect learning and achievement in academic content areas. The second category includes academic outcomes that reflect learners' successful progression through education systems. You may also include measures of social behavioral competencies and employment and earnings in addition to academic outcomes if they are relevant to the research you are proposing. We define social and behavioral competencies as the social skills, attitudes, and behaviors that are important to learner success in school and beyond. In addition, we define employment and earnings outcomes as things such as hours of employment, job stability, and wages and benefits. 3, the setting requirement. Please note all proposed research must be relevant to education in the United States and must address factors under the control of the U.S. education system. For the secondary schools EL Center, the research must be conducted in education settings that include grades 6 to 12 or on data collected from such settings. And you must plan to conduct research in at least 2 states or territories. The proposal narrative is the heart of your application. It is where you set out your plan of research and the justification for it. The center narrative is composed of 5 sections, and we recommend that it be no more than 35 pages. The 5 sections are significance, the research plan, the national leadership and outreach activities, management and institutional resources, and personnel. In the RFA, you will find a list of requirements and recommendations for each of these sections. There are also a series of appendices you will need to submit with your proposal. Some are required, but others are optional. For information about these, you should refer to the RFA and discuss any questions or concerns with the program officer listed in the RFA. Now, I'm going to highlight some specific requirements and recommendations for each section of the center narrative. The significance section is the first section of the narrative and should set the stage for your proposed work. Here, you should explain why it is important to study the policies, system-level practices, and approaches you have identified as critical to improving secondary school EL's access to the general curriculum and education outcomes. In doing so, you must describe this conceptual framework that will guide your work, the policies, system-level practices, and approaches you will study, and the research questions you will address. Under the research plan section, you will describe your research designs and methods for your focused program of research and demonstrate how they will allow you to address your research questions. Items you must describe under the research plan include the characteristics of your sample, research design and methods for each study proposed, power analysis if a causal study is proposed, and the data analysis plans. Given the amount of information you need to include, the research plan may be the longest section of the center narrative. It is also recommended that you organize the research plan into 2 subsections, one for each of the components of the secondary school EL Center's focused program of research, and explain how the 2 components of the focused program of research are complementary. The Secondary School EL Center is also expected to provide strong national leadership, capacity building, and outreach activities. In your proposal narrative, when you discuss leadership and outreach activities, you should make sure to discuss the audiences you intend to reach and how you will reach them. Here are some examples of the activities that the Secondary School EL Center can engage in. We do expect each center to have a website where they share information with multiple audiences. Also, make sure to identify the researchers and practitioners you intend to work with while engaging in your leadership and outreach activities. Under the Management and Institutional Resources section, you will need to demonstrate that you have the organizational structure, institutional capacity, and access to the resources needed to manage the project, to conduct the project, and to disseminate the results of the project. You will want to make it clear that you have people and resources available to do the work you have discussed in the previous sections. If you plan to work in schools or other education delivery settings in the first year, you should include letters of agreement from education organizations. Also, if the developer or distributor of program or intervention is working as part of or with the center, describe their role and how you will maintain objectivity. Under the Personnel section, you want to demonstrate that your team possesses the appropriate training and experience to carry out the focused program of research and national leadership activities and will have sufficient time to commit to the project. In particular, for key personnel involved in the project, you should identify and describe their qualifications to carry out the proposed work, roles and responsibilities within the project, percent of time and calendar months per year to be devoted to the project, past success at disseminating research findings to policymaker and practitioner audiences and in peer-reviewed scientific journals, experience that is relevant to national leadership activities, and experience and a capacity to manage a project of this size and type. Finally, the Secondary School EL Center is also expected to conduct supplemental activities such as meetings and smaller scale studies that speak to other issues that are important within the context of EL education in secondary settings. The Secondary Schools EL Center will work cooperatively with IES to select and design these supplemental activities to respond to pressing policy and practice needs within the topic covered by the center. For this reason, IES does not expect a detailed plan for these supplemental activities in the application, but does expect the grantee to set aside 5% of the maximum grant award, or approximately $500,000 for supplemental activities. The RFA highlights specific recommendations under each section of the center narrative to improve the quality of your application. I've highlighted here some of those recommendations. First, I want to mention that IES expects your application to include at least 2 studies to address the focused program of research for the Secondary School EL Center. One study should identify barriers to EL's access to the general curriculum, and a second study should examine an approach to overcoming those barriers. Each study should address the requirements and recommendations under the 5 sections of the center narrative. Also, as appropriate to your research questions, IES recommends that you refer to the recommendations for project types in its Education Research Grants program to make sure your research plan is complete. For instance, if you're proposing to conduct an exploration type study as part of the center's focused program of research, you may want to refer to the recommendations outlined under that project type in the Education Research Grants RFA. The Secondary School EL Center awards will be limited to a maximum of 5 years duration and $10 million across the 5 years. In terms of budget allocations, please note that no more than 75% of the budget should be allocated for the focused program of research, and at least 5% of the budget should be allocated for the supplemental studies. Now that you know what needs to be done in your application, what should you do next? As mentioned earlier, you should carefully read the full RFA. This webinar only includes highlights. See Part 1 of the RFA for a summary of changes from the previous year. Of note, we have a separate application submission guide this year. Since it is now a separate document from the RFA, you will need to access and download it separately. Read it carefully, as there are many instructions that will help you submit your application correctly and on time. You may need to set up accounts ahead of time of the deadline, so don't wait until the last minute. Letters of intent are strongly encouraged but not required, so you may still submit an application even if you did not submit an LOI on time. Listed here is the information you should include as part of your letter of intent. This slide includes important dates for 84.305C, the R&D Center competition. Applications must be received at grants.gov no later than September 26, 2019 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. The letters of intent are due on July 11, 2019, and the application package will be posted on grants.gov on July 11th as well. The possible start dates for the award are between July 1, 2020 and September 1, 2020. There are a few things we want to leave you with before we finish this webinar. First, read the request for applications. There is a lot of important detail in the RFA. IES has spent a great deal of time over the years making the RFA a user-friendly guide to developing a high-quality application. So be sure you know those requirements and recommendations for the center topic to which you are submitting. Browse through the posted abstracts or our funded center grants on our website. Our abstracts are fairly detailed so that they will give you a good sense of the quality and type of grant that may typically get funded by IES. IES will also post on-demand webinars that you can access at your convenience, covering a wide range of topics, including a grant writing workshop or webinars about specific funding competitions. Those will be posted in the coming weeks. We also have a Resources for Researchers page with grant information for you, including methodological resources to assist in preparing an IES research grant application, videos from past IES training institutes, information about available data sets and tools, among other things. The best way to develop a competitive application is to discuss your idea with and receive feedback from a program officer. So discuss your center idea with a program officer by emailing a project synopsis or short questions, or schedule a time for a call. You will hear from us if you submit a letter of intent. Time permitting, we will also review draft applications. And finally, we are available for discussion after you receive your reviews. If you have any questions about submitting an application to the Secondary School EL Center competition, please feel free to reach out to me for assistance. Thank you.